In the second part of the lecture, I'll be talking about the principles Franklin proposes for explaining why agents sometimes are not accountable for their actions. And Franklin argues that all pleas are explained by three principles. So there are three principles that explain all instances where you get off the hook for doing something. And these three principles state that you are not accountable for your action if your action is either your action wasn't wrong, or you weren't morally competent when performing the action, or you had no reasonable opportunity not to perform the action. So let's go over these three principles in turn. The most straightforward principle is the principle of wrongdoing. It simply says that you can't be blamed for an action if the action wasn't morally wrong, which seems straightforward enough. And that's the case, and that's an example of that is the case we already mentioned. Someone promised someone else to pick them up from the airport, but then they don't do it because on the way there they encounter an accident and they stop to help with the accident. If that happens, then you simply did nothing wrong, and so you're not to be blamed. That seems very intuitive. The second principle says that you can only be blamed for an action if you are normatively competent. And that's a principle that can get you off the hook even if the action was morally wrong. To understand that principle, we have to understand what we mean by normative competence. And normative competence roughly requires that you have two abilities. You have the ability to understand moral reasons, and you have to be able to act based on this understanding of moral reasons. For example, this guy here is not normatively competent because he doesn't understand moral reasons. He thinks that curiosity is a sufficient justification for shooting a man. And so he's not morally competent because he has no understanding of what's right or wrong. This person here, let's suppose, does understand what's right or wrong, but that person's understanding of the world is so compromised that he can't really act on these moral reasons, and so he also isn't normatively competent. The principle of normative competence is supposed to explain why, for example, people who have severe psychological conditions, such as insanity, or how we think of psychopaths in popular culture, are not accountable for their behavior. And so you might now think that these two principles that we talked about so far are already enough to explain all pleas. But Franklin does not think so. And to see why Franklin thinks that the two principles we've talked about so far are not enough to explain all pleas, we have to say something about the metaphysics of abilities. And so note that normative competence requires that the agent needs to have certain abilities. She needs to have the ability to understand moral reasons, and she needs to have the ability to act in accordance with her understanding of these moral reasons. But the complication is that abilities come in different senses, and to see this, consider the following cases. So here's a person who's tied in his arms and legs, and so we can then ask, does this person have the ability to walk? And it seems the answer will be ambiguous because on the one hand we might think, yes, that person is able to walk because that person has healthy legs and has a functioning physical body, so that person totally has what it takes to walk. But on the other hand, we might want to say that this person cannot walk after all. He's in chains. If he tried to walk, he would actually fail. And so here's a second example. Suppose this person learned French in high school, but right now he has like a mouth gag, such that he can't utter a single word. And so we might now ask, does this person have the ability to speak French? And the answer will again be ambiguous. On the one hand, we want to say that person can speak French because he learned it in school. He knows all the grammar, he knows all the words, he knows how to pronounce them. Clearly, this person is a French speaker. He has the ability to speak French. But on the other hand, we want to say that this person doesn't have the ability to speak French right now because he has a mouth gag. If you ask him a French question, he won't be able to give you a French answer. And there's of course nothing deep or mysterious going on. What simply is going on that we can mean different things with the word ability. And to clear up this ambiguity, Franklin wants to say that in all these cases, we want to say that the person does have the relevant ability. And by ability, we nearly mean having the general skill, the know-how to perform a certain action. But we say that this person lacks the opportunity. So these two people here, this person has the ability to walk, but doesn't have the opportunity to walk due to being in chains. And this person has the ability to speak French, but he lacks the opportunity to speak French. And that's why Franklin thinks that we need a third principle, because the principle of normative competence only talks about abilities, but he thinks that to deserve blame, you also need to have a reasonable opportunity to avoid the action. And he thinks that we need the principle of reasonable opportunity because of cases like the following. So here take again our the man who's chained on hands and legs, and take a case where this person is actually a very, very good swimmer, but he's chained, and so he watches helplessly as a child drowns. And you might think that Franklin motivates the principle of reasonable opportunity because it explains why that person is not to blame for the child's death. Because he does have the ability to save the child, he does have the ability to understand that it's morally obligatory to save the child, and he has the ability to act on these reasons. He just doesn't have the opportunity due to being chained. And Franklin gives a second case like that, where you have a drug addict, and that person also has an overdue library book, which he's supposed to return. But then instead of returning the library book, the person actually drives to her dealer and buys drugs due to her desire to get drugs. And Franklin thinks that the person is not to blame because her action is driven by her addictive desire, and so it's in a sense out of her control. But Franklin thinks that to explain this, we need to invoke the principle of reasonable opportunity, because again, she did have the general ability to do it, she just didn't have the opportunity. And just to give you a preview of chapter 3, in chapter 3, Franklin will invoke the principle of reasonable opportunity to argue that determinism is incompatible with free will. Because he will argue that if determinism is true, then nobody ever has the opportunity to avoid doing what they actually do. And so no one is ever to blame for actually anything they do. And so we'll look at this argument next time. Talk to you then.